Good afternoon and welcome to episode 2 of The Crowded Booth. My name is Bryce Kuhn. I'm alongside John Kuhn once again. Before we get started, make sure to follow us on all social media. That's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Crowded Booth. You can find links to both SoundCloud and iTunes that we're going to be having the audio version. And then our YouTube channel, The Crowded Booth. Go ahead and like and subscribe for more content. And we're going to go ahead and get things started here. As we talked about a couple days ago, the first playoff semifinal at 5 o'clock on Monday. That's Georgia versus Oklahoma out there in Pasadena. And today we're going to be talking about Clemson and Alabama. Now, these two teams, as Clemson won the ACC title, they were able to beat soundly the Miami Hurricanes, which was going to be a great matchup. They are going to be taking on Alabama, which with much some confusion and much controversy, Alabama's in the playoff without having played for, as you well know, their conference title, not even playing in the game after losing one game to Auburn. But in my personal opinion, much deserving of it, and that's something you could get into and do a whole show about. But Alabama's in, that is it. So Alabama's going to be playing Clemson in the Sugar Bowl down there in New Orleans, and this is going to be a great physical game of both teams with a similar style of play.
It's round 3, Alabama versus Clemson. And these two teams, like you say, are so much alike. Their running backs, their quarterbacks, their defensive line, everything is very similar. They're very close in stats, and each way they both have a strong defense. Alabama scores about 39 points a game. That comes in at number 9 in the country. Clemson is about number 20, and they come in at 35 points per game. And both defenses are very stingy when giving up points. Like we said, if you looked at our last time we talked about Georgia and versus Oklahoma, Georgia was number 4 in scoring defense. And the top 2 teams in scoring defense, the stingiest ones, are in this game, Alabama and Clemson. Alabama being number 1, coming in, giving up about 11.5 points a game, and Clemson giving up almost 13 points a game. So they're very similar. Round 3, everybody's excited about what's going to happen. What do you think the storylines are?
Yeah, definitely. The storylines for this game, the offensive lines, both these teams have very good defense. We talked about Alabama's offensive line, though, against Clemson's defensive line. We've heard all year about how dominant this Clemson defense is. That defensive line, they're anchored by Wilkins and Farrell. Those guys can do the dirty work up front and allow that Clemson defense to swarm to the ball. That's going to be really something to key in on. One of the big performances by that defense, remember, very early in September, they played against Auburn, and that home crowd was rocking, and they racked up 12 sacks against that Auburn offense. That's definitely a cool thing to look at. They have a common opponent, but that's one of the things you have to look at. The offensive line for Alabama, how can they hold up against a fast and physical defense? You saw last time we saw them play, they played against Auburn. Into the season, and that right there, Auburn, we talked about in our previous episode about how Auburn is definitely a team that is fast and physical on the defensive side of the ball, a very dominant defensive line. How will Alabama be able to make adjustments? We were talking, are they going to have to do some repass options, some quarterback draws? We're all very familiar with Jalen Hurts and his ability to run the ball. So what does that look like with him? Was the offensive coordinator and offensive coaching staff going to get some design run plays for Jalen Hurts to maybe slow up that pass rush?
Another thing, too, Alabama, Hurts had a great year. But one thing against Auburn, you found out that the defensive line of Auburn was overpowering Alabama's offensive line in many cases. So in this game, Clemson they lead the nation with 44 sacks this year. Again, that can be a little bit skewed because when they played Auburn earlier in the year, they had 12. But I think what's going to have to happen for Jalen Hurts is he's going to I think the coaches are going to try to get to keep that defensive line from overpowering and really getting onto him. He's going to have to do things really quick, maybe some screen passes, some draws, to get the ball out of his hands pretty quick. And that way it may kind of slow down the defensive line from putting so much pressure on him as quarterback, and maybe making those defensive backs drop back. They'll have to play a little bit more zone. So then when that opens up, he may be able to pick and find his little holes in the defense to get his passes in there better.
Yeah, definitely looking at Alabama's offense, how they're going to perform. Jalen Hurts, like you said, dual threat quarterback, can run and throw the ball. We've seen this, and the thing is, we've seen this game already played out twice. The both teams are very different, but Jalen Hurts in his second meeting against Clemson, one thing Clemson was able to do last year was able to get pressure on him and make him have to make a perfect pass. And Jalen Hurts, while he is a kind of, you see him as more of a running back kind of guy, he's able to run the ball with authority in between the tackles and has some nice outside moves when one-on-one. But making him make some hard throws on the run, if Clemson can force him that with Wilkins there and Farrell, that's going to spell a tough time for Alabama. Definitely Calvin Ridley, I mean, we've all heard about him for the past 3 years. He's one of the best players on the field that's going to be on the field there Monday night in New Orleans. They're definitely going to have to get him involved and see if he can be a deep home run threat, because one thing they're able to do when they have those two running backs, Damian Harris and Bo Scarborough, we're going to get into, but along with Jalen Hurts' ability to run the ball, a little read option, if you play action off of that and go over the top to Calvin Ridley, that's something we've seen Alabama do a lot this year. Calvin Ridley accounting for almost half the yards that Jalen Hurts has thrown for this year. So definitely going to be a big thing if Jalen Hurts can be able to read the defense. And as a second year, he's only a sophomore, but he has played in some big primetime games so far, leading Alabama to a national championship appearance and an SEC championship last year.
Right.
And I've already been playing in some big games this year. Definitely going to be looking forward to seeing how he's going to play with them.
Yeah, look at some of Hurts' stats. He almost threw for 2,000 yards. He ran for almost 800. He accounted for 23 touchdowns, and one big thing is they only threw one interception all year. Now, the teams that he played, maybe a little suspect. In some cases, they had big blowouts. But that's something that Clemson is going to have to do to try to get a turnover for him, make a mistake. Harris and Scarborough, they accounted for almost 1,500 yards rushing together. And one of the things I wanted to mention too is I've seen a lot of this talked about in the recent days. When Alabama played Auburn, it was a tough physical game. Auburn was coming in. They had their mindset that they were going to do everything that they could to make it to that SEC championship game, because they wanted to be the first team that with a 2-loss record to be in that top 4, and that's the only way they could get there. And at the time that Alabama played them, Auburn was on a roll. Kerryon Johnson was running hard. Alabama's got to come to Auburn to play. Very loud there. Also, too, you don't like to say it or make this as an excuse, but Alabama did have some people hurt. Linebackers were hurt. So that was a big time game. So to see if Hurts can rebound from that, make adjustments throughout playing Clemson is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, that's definitely big with those injuries they had. That definitely decimated the team. Probably had a little bit of effect of how that game went along. It was a 26-14 final. They lost to Auburn, but having a month to get those guys healthy, Nick Saban's got to be happy about that. I think that's going to go a long way with how Alabama's defense matches up against Clemson's offense, because Clemson's offense definitely has a high-powered offense. But definitely getting those guys back from injury. And like you said, that Auburn game, we talked about this when we talked about the Georgia loss to Auburn when we were going over the Rose Bowl, kind of a once in a blue moon kind of atmosphere. Jordan Hare was fired up, like you said. They had just come off beating Georgia, who was number 1, and then he got to play another number 1 team 2 weeks later. And knew if they won that game, they were going to play another number 1 or top 5 team. Right. So definitely they showed up, and give all the credit to them as they played really well. But I think Alabama didn't really play like themselves. You're talking about the run game, kind of seemed to get away from that a little bit. As we all know from last year, and this is something to look forward to in this game, Bo Scarborough is a man out there. He's a big guy.
Big guy.
Standing about 6'2", 6'3", 220-pound back. I mean, he's a force to be reckoned with. And if you remember in the playoff semifinal last year against Washington, he ran all over that Washington defense that was not prepared. So we saw them get a little bit away from that in the Auburn game. We definitely don't want to just focus on the Auburn game, but with that being the most recent game we've seen them play, Auburn did a great job, like we said, what Clemson will need to do, forcing Jalen Hurts out of the pocket and making him make some tough throws. But Damian Harris and Bo Scarborough, if they get those guys going downhill, then that's when Alabama becomes hard to stop, because then the read option comes into play. When the read option comes into play, then your play action comes into play. And that's when those wide receivers for Alabama that, you have Calvin Ridley, but there's other guys on that field that are talented that can get open. And you also have to watch out for Damian Harris. He's a force out of the backfield as well through the pass game, kind of like a Sony Michel kind of guy for Georgia. So definitely going to be something to look at for them. Definitely taken forward. But if we go on to the next topic there, you were talking about the quarterback and Jalen Hurts. Definitely one thing for Clemson, Kelly Bryant, they're kind of similar guys. They kind of have a similar play style, with Kelly Bryant being a probably more polished passer than Jalen Hurts.
You look at his stats for this year. He threw, and he was out. Was he out just one game or maybe two?
And he was out in that big game versus Syracuse.
Versus Syracuse. He threw for over 2,700 yards, ran for over 600, accounted for 24 touchdowns. He does have some really good running backs that they accounted for almost 1,400 yards and 20 touchdowns, and both of them, plugging out at over 6 yards and 7 yards a carry. And that was one thing I think I saw with Clemson is they were talking about how they're a more balanced team this year. The passing yards are not as great. Deshaun Watson goes to the NFL. In that championship game last year, I can't remember how many yards he accounted for, but I'm sure he was well over 300 yards passing and probably close to 100 yards rushing. Dabo, Coach Sweeney, is talking about this year. I saw him interviewed the other day about what does he think. Every team is different. What does he think is the biggest thing that's different about this year's team? And he talks about how it's balanced, how the run game and the passing game are very close. Like I said, they total about 450 yards per game, and it's about a 240 passing to 210 rushing. So it's very, very even, which was probably a little bit different than it was last year. So the quarterbacks, it's a very similar team, and I think one of the biggest things is going to be who of the quarterbacks is going to make the crucial play or have the crucial drive in the game to make the difference. That's going to be a big deal. Who's going to deliver when they really need him to?
Yeah, definitely looking at Clemson's offense and Kelly Bryant, we've seen him. He's a really big playmaker for him. If you say, looking at those Alabama players, maybe one player does not determine the outcome of a game. Well, when you see a guy like Kelly Bryant go down, and the only game he has not played in is a game versus Syracuse, and to be frank, Syracuse is not the toughest opponent, but when you don't have your leader and your field general on the field, it's hard to win. And he wasn't in that game, and you saw Clemson suffer.
And they were in the Carrier Dome in Syracuse, very loud, very hard circumstances to play in. But they overcame that, and I think Clemson probably deserves the #1 ranking. How strong they played throughout the rest of the year, how their defense dominated, especially when you get to the ACC championship game. I think Miami probably ran out of gas by the time they got to play them. So that was a 38-7 or 45-7 game. So the next thing I think you need to talk about is Alabama's linebackers. Now, they found out this past Monday that their middle linebacker, Dylan Moses, is out. Of course, they lost Hamilton earlier on in the year. I think he did something else to his knee again. May have been in the Auburn game or sometime like that. So, but one thing that Alabama can be glad about is their outside linebackers are healthy again. But one thing I think Clemson's going to try to attack is the young Evans is going to replace Moses at middle linebacker. Now, Evans is a good linebacker. He had 10.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks this year. But I think Clemson is going to try to find a way to see how they can attack him and see how he can take the pressure now that Clemson has a good running game, a more even and balanced attack.
Yeah, definitely. With Clemson having that more balanced attack, like we talked about, like you said, Deshaun Watson, probably a guy, he can definitely run the ball. If you saw him with Houston this past NFL season, definitely can run the ball. Probably a more prolific passer, though, than Kelly Bryant. Kelly Bryant can make plays with both feet, and traditionally we've seen those Alabama defenses struggle with dual-threat quarterbacks. Alabama has had trouble every year, and besides the fact that it's the Iron Bowl and it's one of the biggest rivalries in college football, Auburn usually tends to give Alabama trouble because they got a guy that can run and throw the ball. And you see, the big guys that can run and throw the ball, such as a Cam Newton, they give Nick Saban defenses, they give them fits because they're hard to guard. You don't ever really know what they're going to do. So if Clemson comes into this game and stays true to what they do, and like we talked about in the Georgia-Oklahoma game, it's really going to come between those battle of the trenches. Kelly Bryant has the talent to win a game by himself. And we saw him win some big games. I mean, that Miami game, I think everyone was looking at that one, that primetime slot on ESPN to be a primetime game, and Kelly Bryant led the Tigers to a blowout. And I think, like you said, that cemented that spot in the number 1 ranking for them to go into the playoffs. Those linebackers for Alabama, definitely, it's going to be good getting those guys back. Those outside linebackers we talked about, Alabama's never really had an elite pass rush, but they've gotten guys that can get the ball and have a nose for getting to the football. One thing you've seen Kirby Smart bring to Georgia, the gang tackling mentality that and when one guy gets the ball, everyone's coming. You see about 9, 10, 11 helmets on the ball, and that's going to be huge for Clemson if how they will counteract that with their offensive line and having those tough guys battling to the football. That's going to be tough for Clemson to handle. And I just think, like we talked about, these teams are so even that it is really hard to have a clear-cut favorite. Where on the other side, you're saying, well, if Baker Mayfield goes crazy, Oklahoma's going to win. If Georgia controls the line of scrimmage, Georgia's going to win. It's kind of more clear-cut with these two teams, and we've seen in the past 2 games, this being the 3rd matchup in 3 years for them. This one is a tough one to call. Teams are just very similar in their playing style and physicality.
One other thing I wanted to bring up too is, of course, Pruitt will be leaving to go coach Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
How much does that affect? Does that affect Alabama's preparation? You know, last year they had the whole thing about Saban had to get rid of
Lane Kiffin
right before
the
national championship game. How does that affect? You know, Kirby had to do that when he was at Alabama. He had to juggle preparing for a national championship game and also, hey, I'm fixing to take over at the University of Georgia. Does that weigh into it any way? I don't think it will, based off of what I've always seen about Saban. Like you say, these teams are so similar. I think it's just going to come down to probably just like it has the past 2 years. And to win the game or score the final 3 points or touchdown, whatever they ever got to do to win the game. Also, too, you know, we bring up Clemson's passing game. You still have Mr. Renfro. This guy, you see him. I saw him interviewed today and he is. You don't see him as such a big threat wide receiver, but when he's played Alabama, it's like he just puts it in a different gear.
He's got a big game mentality.
He scored 4 touchdowns in the 2 games against Alabama in the big spotlight. Does he do that again? Maybe. I don't know. Look who he's got to go against this time.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to have to go against Alabama once again, and that leads you to the Defensive Player of the Year in the country, Minkah Fitzpatrick, who, if you remember, he had his coming out party against Georgia when they played them 2 years ago in Athens, and he has not slowed down. Definitely, in my opinion, a top 10 draft pick for any team in the NFL. He is a force to be reckoned with. I would not be surprised just because Hunter Renfrow is that dangerous. He's not a big guy, a slot receiver that gets open. Minkah Fitzpatrick's probably going to be shadowing him all over the field. They don't want him to get open because he's elusive.
A lot of respect between those two from what the interviews that I've seen.
Yeah, and they played each other for the past 3 years. This will be year number 3 they played against each other. So huge for them to be able to go against each other. And really was what an exciting game. And I can't even tell you how many pro scouts are going to be there because there is a ton of future NFL talent littered all over that field.
I think I saw a stat where since 2012, Alabama and Clemson together have had 18 first-round draft picks to go to the NFL.
And that's only 5 years ago. So that's big time, and most of those guys are still contributing in a big way for their NFL team. But definitely Hunter Renfrow, like you said, has a knack for making those big plays in big moments, and you saw with 3 or 4 seconds left in the game last year, Deshaun Watson on that little rollout. The pick play that always happens at Hunter Renfrow.
Everybody has that in their arsenal, though. That play has been run since people could throw the ball. So.
And I wouldn't be surprised with them to see Hunter Renfrow in that first half. Alabama's going to key heavily on him and try to eliminate him from the game because a quarterback like Kelly Bryant that, Deshaun Watson had played in that game.
Right.
He played the year before and lost.
Right.
So he knew what it was like to play in a big-time, national championship game.
Right.
And in a playoff atmosphere. Kelly Bryant, on the other hand, while he was on the sidelines for that game, he's only played an ACC championship.
Yeah.
So he does not have that maybe as much big game experience that Jalen Hurts has. Like we talked about earlier, Jalen Hurts only a sophomore, which is hard to believe, but he has played in a multitude of big games.
And we talked about, before we came on, talking about Alabama, and yes, they are 11-1 this year, and I don't think there's anything wrong with them being number 4. I think they should be there. I think they got picked right over Ohio State. But and you look at their Alabama, they almost have the same exact stats as they've had before. They have the defense that shuts you down, gives up very minimum amount of points. But it just seems something that Alabama is not. It just seems a little bit different. It's not to me. It's not the Alabama teams that you've seen in the past. But I will say this: if you have to have any coach to prepare you for a game like this, Saban is the coach to do that. And Dabo and maybe Kirby and this young guy at Oklahoma, Riley, maybe they're kind of in that same mold. They've had plenty of time. They've had 4 weeks. People have gotten healthy. Alabama will play, like I believe, like a traditional Alabama team plays. Hurts, he's a sophomore this year. His numbers not quite as great as they were, and the newness kind of wore off. People kind of figured out what he was going to do, but still, it's going to be a very tight game. Again, what do you think who are you picking for the guy that's got to stand out? That's going to be the standout player, or could it be a group?
Well, I'll say this first off. Any person watching this and watching this at home, if you think that Alabama is not going to show up just because they're number 4,
right,
and people are counting down and say this is not the Alabama of old, you're crazy.
Right.
Nick Saban has probably been preaching all December long to his team about how a lot of people don't think we should be here.
And Georgia is kind of the new kid on the block in these 4, but you could put these guys in a bag and pull out who's number 1.
Oh, all these teams are very good. And
Oklahoma's been there, Alabama's been there, Clemson's been there, Georgia, like I say, is the new guy in. But out of those 3, any one of them could be. Any of them, all of them deserve to be there. So they're very close together.
I think, and going back to my key players is going to be 2 of them. It's going to be Jalen Hurts and Kelly Bryant. Like we talked about earlier, the big thing to me for the key to the game is which quarterback can close it out. We've seen Deshaun Watson take that step. Coker 2 years ago, he was able to lead that team to a national championship. So what does Deshaun Watson do? What can he do to? What Deshaun Watson do? What can Kelly Bryant do? What is he able to do to win that game?
He's going to have to. It always boils down to this: you've got to have a balanced attack. You can't turn the ball over. He has 6 interceptions to 13 touchdowns.
And Hurts only has 1 interception.
Only have 1 interception. And I know you always hear these guys, these coaches, and I'm sure other coaches, I'm sure all coaches do this. If you're going to win the game, you got to avoid giving the other team opportunities that they shouldn't have by turning the ball over to them. Another thing too, if you go for my guy, I'm going to go with the group of 5 offensive linemen for Alabama. Alabama's got to be able to control the line of scrimmage. They've got to be able to slow the defensive line of Clemson down if they're going to have a chance in the game. It's always, you hear Coach Corso talk about it's always one in the trenches. Who's going to be the most physical for that 60 minutes playing the game. And like we talked about when Alabama played Auburn, did they get away from running the ball? I don't think Scarborough and Harris even had 20 touches of running the ball in that game. And again, it wasn't a blowout. Could it have been a closer game? I don't know. Again, Auburn's defensive line was playing exceptionally well in that period. So my group is the 5 offensive linemen. If they can establish the run, give Jalen enough time where he can make a decision, and I'm sure the coaches are going to make him have quick decisions at the beginning, and get that Clemson team running upfield and have little draws that if they're successful, it's going to make Clemson think twice. Okay, we can't do that. We've got to, we can't rush upfield as much and try to get as much pressure on him. We have to play a little bit back.
Mm-hmm. So following to that, real quick before we wrap up here, what's your prediction for the Sugar Bowl and to see who advances to Atlanta to face the winner of the Rose Bowl?
I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks, and I'm thinking, I picked Georgia to win over Oklahoma, about a 34-28 score. I'd like for it to be a SEC, all-SEC championship. I'm just afraid it's not going to be. I think Clemson, to me, they're playing the best right now. Like I say, Alabama, not to say they're not going to bring their A game. They are. But I believe Clemson squeaks this out. I believe they are the more balanced team. Again, can Bryant play under this pressure? I think he can. He's not a freshman. He's a junior. He's been standing on the sideline watching. So my prediction is probably, I want to say Clemson 30-27.
Well, I'm going to have to go against you in that. I think Alabama's going to come out and play. I think while it's not an emotional game, you saw Auburn, they had the emotion on their side. And while it's not going to be a home field advantage, New Orleans is not too far from Tuscaloosa. And there,
True.
Alabama travels well, but so does Clemson. I think Alabama's going to feed off all the doubters all Christmas long. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, we forget this is Alabama. This is not a non-Power 5 team that hasn't been here before.
Right.
This is not a even a
it's
Georgia
hard
team
to,
that
it's
hasn't
hard
been
to
here
pick
before.
against them.
I think Alabama's going to come out, and I think Jalen Hurts is going to step up to the challenge and use off of his experience. I will say, if they can run the ball with authority, I think they're going to win the game. And I'd say Alabama's going to win a close one once again. I think they're going to have to come in and we know their special teams, and I know this is going to freak some Alabama fans out, so their special teams is going to have to be on mark, but I think it's going to be a field goal win there in the final seconds, 31-30.
31-30.
Alabama is going to come out victorious.
All right.
Well, that's all the time we have for today.
You want to mention we've got to mention that.
Yeah, we're going to mention the T-shirts. We have the T-shirts once again, if you saw in our previous show, just the black standard T-shirt. You can DM us on any of the accounts we have. That's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Crowded Booth. Also, send us an email at thecrowdedbooth@gmail.com. They're $10 a piece, and we'll try to get your order in as soon as possible.
And where are we at today?
And definitely we'll like to key in on where we are. We'll give a good thank you to Roy Cook here at Cook's Place here in Columbus, Georgia, on the corner of Moon and Miller Road. This is the location that we are at today. They also have one in the Landings. That is Moon and Miller Road and Cook's. This is Cook's Place. They have a little one over there in Landings where you can just run by and get it. It's anything from scrambled dogs and
the
getting
best
that old time
scrambled dogs in town.
That old time diner feel. So once again, give a shout out to him and thank you for that. As you see, he's down here in the Lion's Den at Cook's Place. That's on Moon and Miller Road. Once again, don't forget to like and to subscribe to these videos on YouTube. And if you're only listening to the audio, make sure to follow us on SoundCloud and iTunes. That's all we have today, and we'll be coming with you with a show to see who wins these two playoff semifinals for the national championship coming up soon. Thank you for watching. And we are done now.